Hey folks, my name is Krishna, and in this video we're going to take a look at 3 techniques that you can use to simulate variable line weight using digital tools. So in this particular situation here, what is line weight? So if I'm pressing down using a brush, my tablet will pick up the pressure that I'm applying through my stylus, and as I press more, I get a thicker line weight. As I press less, I get a thinner line weight. And this is really what you want out of a digital drawing tool. You want the ability to communicate thin to thick lines as you work. Now, there are some brushes that you can pick from that Photoshop, for example, will give you where you have no pressure sensitivity. And one big clue is that a brush that lacks pressure sensitivity will not have tapered ends. So in Photoshop, under general brushes, if I look at hard round, you can see that the line stays the same thickness, unlike the other brushes that are below it that have a tapering of lines going from thin to thick. So here's what a uniform line weight looks like. You don't see any variability in its thickness. In other words, it doesn't matter whether I press down really hard or go really soft, the line is the line. And this can be a useful technique if you're trying to simulate vectorized art. I've seen this with logos and other things like that where uniform line weight is very, very handy. But I want to share with you 3 methods that you can use if you're dealing with a brush that has no pressure sensitivity and your tablet settings aren't working or something along those lines. How do you work with that? So the first and the easiest method is by, let's just pick that hard round brush. We're going to make that brush ridiculously smaller. So if I use my left bracket key, I'm going to make that brush smaller. I'm going to zoom into this character's hands here, and I'm simply going to draw that line. I'm going to make the brush even tinier, and I'm going to double up on my lines. I'm using the left bracket key to make the brush smaller. And what I'm doing here is kind of faking it out. I'm going from thin to thick, and I'm just going to use my magic wand tool to make a selection inside those 2 lines, and I'll hit Option Delete or Alt Backspace. And now I have this thing that looks like variable line weight. So this is the recommended technique. This is, I think, it will take you more time to do this, but I think it is probably your best bet, doubling up on your lines. The second technique here is basically where you're using the freeform lasso tool. For example, let's say that I've got my lasso tool like so, and I can come back in, make a selection, Alt Backspace, and you can see that it's going from thicker to thinner. Now, the one thing that I will say is that this does give the lines a little bit less consistency. You can see that it looks a little bit more wobbly. I don't know how to describe that, but compare this first line to this line here, and you can see that there is a little bit more angularity on your line. So that's the other technique. You can use the lasso tool and just fill in these areas. Essentially, you're doubling up, but instead of using your brush, you're using the lasso tool, and you're filling it in. And if you want to add to your selections, you're going to hold down the Shift key with the lasso tool, and you can see how I'm getting this nice thin to thick look. This works best for very, very small areas compared to really long sweeping lines. The other technique that you can also use here, and you have to get a little bit creative, is let's see if I can find something else here that would be good. Let's look at her eyes. I will switch to the elliptical marquee tool for the eye, and then I'll make this on a new layer. I'll go to Edit. I'll choose Stroke. Edit, Stroke, and I'll give it a 3-pixel selection there. And I'll just simply make a copy of the stroke by hitting Command J, moving this off to the side, and you can see that there's now a little bit of a gap. So for organic rounded shapes like this, or even for straight shapes, you can get away with that. And then you can come back in and you can fill this in with your brush. And so in that way you can get that look. Now, it's gonna look a little bit more digital. So I like to go ahead and just add a little bit of extra items in there just to go ahead and make it look less perfect. But that's something else that you can also do. So just to summarize here, you can double up on your lines. You can use the lasso poly tool. You can also use the selection stroke method where you make a shape. For example, if I go back over here, this is a shape that is very straight. So I'm gonna use the polygon lasso tool. I can fill that in. I can drop the opacity, come back in with my lasso tool and cut, and then bring the opacity back up and just do a little bit of cleanup work. Make the brush is a little bit thicker. Now these are methods if you have no other choice. If you have no other way of getting your line weight to look thick or thin, you definitely want to look at some of these techniques. The biggest thing I will say is that most modern tablets will have pressure sensitivity. The biggest problem that I'm seeing with some student work is that they've made the brush so tiny and super thin that that's what's causing the problem. So even if you have a pressure sensitive brush, but you're using it at a really small, thin size, you're not going to see variable line weight. So you have to make that brush a bit larger so that you can see it. And on a brush that does have pressure sensitivity, you will see that thin to thickness. But if I were to make this brush ridiculously thin or small, then you're not going to see that, right? So first pro tip is check to see if the brush supports pressure sensitivity. If it does, and you're not getting any variable line weight, just make the brush bigger and you'll start to see that. And if not, I've given you some other techniques that will hopefully help you out in a pinch. As always, I appreciate and value everyone who's watching this video. Thank you so much. If you found any helpful tips or hints in this video, please give it a like, and that way other folks can also find this video as well. If you have ideas for upcoming videos that you'd like for me to talk about, just drop them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.